Hi there, and welcome to part 2 of the story about Black George and the happenings of the first Serbian uprising. Part 1 will be linked down in the description. The first battle between the Serbs and the Ottomans found place near Ivankovac in August 1805, aptly named the Battle of Ivankovac. Duh! The battle ended with a decisive victory for the Serbs. Soon after that, the rebels sent out 16,000 fighters to besiege Belgrade. The Serb rebel leaders started using anti-Muslim rhetorics to mobilize Serb peasants, calling upon them to rise up and drive the Ottomans across the Blue Sea, or whatever the fuck they meant. Black George, or Karadjordje, also appealed to the peasants with memories of the Battle of Kosovo from 1389, stating that the defeated Kosovo has to be avenged. Not Karadjordje being salty because of a lost COD match. He even took it upon himself to use old heraldry and symbols from the times of the old Serbian Empire, which was formed by Dušan the Mighty in 1346. More on that in another video. Giant portraits of Dušan the Mighty were hung in his headquarters as to make his cause appear extra thick. Karadjordje was an edgy boy. In fact, he was so edgy that not only his enemies but also his allies feared his volatile temper. When someone in the army made an oopsie, Karadjordje gave them a stern look and told them next time not to. He straight up executed them. A sergeant in the army would come to Karadjordje and say, "Well, our great leader, this soldier here lost a pouch of ammunition. What should we do?" And Karadjordje was like, "Off with his head!" or something along those lines. But you get it. The historian Brandon A. Ram says that Karadjordje personally killed 125 people. Quite disturbing, I must say. He even ordered his own brother, Marinko, be hanged in 1806. Granted, Marinko was accused of engaging in non-consensual shenanigans with a girl. He then proceeded to hang his dead brother's corpse above his front gate and invited several rebel leaders to show them that he indeed was not screwing around. He was also known for showing no mercy to Muslims, civilians or soldiers. While fighting the Ottomans in a battle, the Ottoman soldiers broke and started fleeing, throwing away their weapons, uniforms and clothing. It was a mess. But Karadjordje ordered his men to catch up to them with swords, daggers and rifles, killing over 2,800 of them. He wasn't only cruel to Muslim soldiers and civilians. He killed Serbs who did not want to join and burned down their houses. Those damn devs, leaving friendly fire on during a PvP match. Anyway, in 1806 the Serbian rebels sent the diplomat Peter Ichko to Constantinople for negotiations, and he succeeded to talk the Ottomans into peace, where the Sultan granted extensive autonomy to the Serbs. But because of the extremely bad infrastructure, it took him months to reach any location, so the rebels managed to take several towns and cities including Belgrade and Smederevo, of which Belgrade was made into the capital. While they managed to take Belgrade city, only the fortress remained under Ottoman control though, but the Serbs held it under siege. When Peter Ichko returned, he told Karadjordje about the successful negotiations. Knowing what the Ottomans offered the Serbs, the Russians, who were at war with the Ottomans, as we earlier established, offered the Serbs an alliance should they continue the fight. Hearing that, Karadjordje refused the Ottomans' offer. 1807 came and Karadjordje issued a promise to the commander of the Ottoman garrison of the fortress in Belgrade, telling him that they shall be granted safe passage if they just left. The Ottoman commander of the garrison, Suleiman Pasha, accepted, but as they emerged from the fortress, they were ambushed by Karadjordje's fighters. The adult men were killed on the spot, and the women and young children were forcibly converted into Orthodox Christianity. The women were made to marry their captors, while the children were placed in the care of Orthodox Christian families. Those who refused or resisted were either killed or expelled. Some of the rebel leaders opposed Karadjordje's attempt to create a centralized state, fearing that it would weaken them or that they would even lose all of their power. It was even suggested to create a central council to rein in Karadjordje's power and write a constitution based on the rule of law. Karadjordje told them the following: "It is easy for this sovereign law of yours to rule in a warm room behind this table, but let us see tomorrow, when the Turks strike, who will meet them and who will beat them." In 1809, the Serbians managed to capture a few more towns and had a few clashes in northern Kosovo, but failed to take the fortress of Novi Pazar. And due to lacking numbers and training, the Serbs also failed to link their territories to Montenegro and gain access to the Adriatic Sea, which Karadjordje described as one of his key aims. The Serbs experienced further setbacks in Niš. 3,000 of them were surrounded at Chegar Hill, knowing that if captured, the Turks would impale each and every Serb fighter. The Serb commander Stevan Sinjelić came up with the perfect plan. He formed a circular formation using the teachings of Xing Wang and waited for the wind to... Just kidding. He blew up the Serbs' entire gunpowder supply, killing himself and all of his fighters on the spot. The Turkish commander did the only logical thing that could be done here. Khurshid Pasha built a stone tower at the site, embedding the skulls of Sinjelić and his warriors in the walls as a warning to others who wished to rebel. Securing Chegar allowed the Ottomans to establish a land corridor extending along the Morava river valley from Niš to the Danube, but soon their advance was halted due to the Russians crossing Danube in September of 1809, attacking the Ottomans in northern Bulgaria, which gave the Serbian rebels some respite, and thanks to that, the rebels managed to reclaim the lost land from the Ottomans, but that brought the Serbs to exhaustion. Now being on the defensive, the Serbian leaders started blaming each other for the recent defeats. Karadjordje blamed the Russians for not intervening earlier on the Serbs' behalf. He went so far as to write Napoleon seeking military assistance, but that git of a man just left him unseen. Some sources say that the French did not think that the Serbs had the military capacity to successfully fight the Ottomans. All that losing has made our boy Karadjordje even more toxic, so much so that he shot and wounded one of his commanders for making a poor military decision. Some would say that that was a poor military decision. That incident, among many others, made people mutiny against Karadjordje. In 1810, the Russians entered Serbia yet again, this time distributing weapons and supplies to Karadjordje and what was left of his loyal followers. Field Marshal Mikhail Kutuzov took part in planning joint actions with Karadjordje's Serbs against the Ottomans and the mutineers, and by the following year the mutineers were defeated. Karadjordje then formed a People's Governing Council, on which he posted notable Serbs, both his supporters and those who would not count themselves as such. The council then recognized Karadjordje as Serbia's hereditary leader and pledged allegiance to his lawful heirs. The fighting went back and forth, but in mid-1812 Russia and the Ottomans signed the Treaty of Bucharest, which brought the Russo-Ottoman War to an end. The Russians awarded Karadjordje the Order of Saint Anna, something like a Medal of Honor for his efforts. The Serbian Council took an oath of loyalty to the Russians, thinking that would assure them further protection, but they were wrong. Napoleon was still a threat to Russia, and fearing an invasion, Tsar Alexander of Russia wanted as many soldiers as possible pulled back to defend the motherland. The Russians and the Ottomans then made a deal which was not necessarily beneficial for the Serbs. The agreement was that the Russians will retreat from Serbia, Wallachia and Moldavia, and that the Serbian fortifications built after 1804 would be destroyed. Furthermore, all the cities and forts from which the Ottomans had been expelled over the course of the uprising were to be reoccupied and garrisoned by the Ottoman troops. In exchange, the Ottomans agreed to declare yet another amnesty for the rebels, as well as to give the Pashaluk of Belgrade a greater degree of autonomy. It became clear that once the foreign support retreated, there was nothing to stop the Ottomans from exacting reprisals against the Serbian population. So Karadjordje decided to refuse the terms of the treaty and continue the fight. Now, weakened and without support, the Serbian rebels were quickly routed by the Ottomans. Karadjordje then fled in early October to the Austrian Empire, and he was joined by around 100,000 Serbs, including 50,000 from Belgrade alone. Belgrade fell later that month, marking the end of the First Serbian uprising. The Ottomans singled out men and boys over the age of 15 for execution and sold the women into slavery. Torture was used extensively and executions were particularly brutal. I will not list here all the things they did for reasons you may already know, but you can look it up if you are that curious. In late 1813, Khurshid Pasha declared a general amnesty, yet again, for the rebels that had survived, but made it clear that Karadjordje and some of the senior Orthodox clerics were specifically exempt. Many of the rebel leaders agreed to lay down their arms, most notable Miloš Obrenović, the rebel commander in Užice, which led to a large number of Serbs returning to their homes, as did many of the Muslims that had been displaced in the fighting. Upon crossing the Danube to go into the Austrian Empire, Karadjordje and his followers were arrested by the Austrians. They were held at the Petrovaradin fortress in Novi Sad, but were later transferred to a prison in the city of Graz. The Ottomans requested that Karadjordje and the rebel leaders be extradited to face punishment, but the Austrians were like, nah, and turned them over to the Russians instead, but not before spending a year in Austrian custody. After he arrived in Russia, he tried to settle in Bessarabia and attempted a civilian life. April 1815 came and Miloš Obrenović orchestrated another anti-Ottoman rebellion in Serbia, which came to be known as the Second Serbian Uprising, which this time came to a quick end with a victory for the Serbs in November 1815. The Ottomans accepted Obrenović's demands for wide-ranging autonomy. The terms were identical to the ones Karadjordje rejected in 1807. The Russians prohibited Karadjordje from returning to the Balkans to take part in the Second Uprising. He objected and went to St. Petersburg to plead his case, but the Russians were like, no, and arrested him instead. Upon release, Karadjordje decided to join a Greek nationalist secret society called Filiki Eteria, meaning Society of Friends, which was founded in 1814 in Odessa and whose purpose was to overthrow the Ottoman rule of Greece and establish an independent Greek state. But they also wanted to create a pan-Balkan uprising against them. The society promised Karadjordje a position of military leadership in the planned uprising and offered to smuggle him into the Pashalok of Belgrade. And on the 24th of July, 1817, Karadjordje arrives at Belgrade, where he contacted his good friend and groomsman from his wedding, Vujica Vulicević, who offered him a little place in the forest of Radovanje. What our boy Karadjordje did not know was that his good old friend was on Miloš Obrenović's payroll. So after escorting Karadjordje to his little house in the forest, he informed Obrenović about it via a courier. Shortly after, he received a letter from Obrenović telling him to eliminate Karadjordje. Vujica couldn't really do it himself, so he hired a man. The man then went one early morning to Karadjordje's house and proceeded to read to him from the Bible. Just kidding, he killed Karadjordje with an axe. Obrenović then sent Karadjordje's head to the Sultan of the Ottomans. Karadjordje's descendants adopted the surname Karadjordjević in his honor, and his murder resulted in a decades-long feud between them and the Obrenović family, which led to the Serbian throne being tossed between those families like a hot potato. But the feud ended in 1903, when rebel officers from the Serbian army killed King Alexander Obrenović and his wife Draga. They are ending their line. The throne went then to Karadjordje's grandson, Peter Karadjordjević. And here we are at the end of this story. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope to see you again. We will of course continue this series with the next video, and until then, don't forget to drink water on a regular basis.